Right, thanks very much indeed for the business news there, Colin. Let's look at some international news. And the question is, exactly how did negotiators to the South Sudan peace agreement get the protagonists to agree to a deal? What's between the tight deadline that hang over the heads, uncompromising neighbours, IGAD or the international community made them agree to form a government of national unity? Sarah Kimani spoke to Kenya's special envoy to South Sudan.
After 6 years of a bloody conflict in which thousands of South Sudanese were killed and millions displaced across the East African region, this week South Sudan finally silenced the guns. There is a government of national unity that is underway, and President Salva Kiir agreed to incorporate Dr. Riek Machar, the former rebel leader, into his government. Now, among those people who worked to see to it that that government is in place and that South Sudan can finally settle down is Kenya's former vice president and now the special envoy of President Kenyatta to the peace efforts in South Sudan, Mr. Kalonzo Musyoka. And he joins me now to just take us through exactly what happened when he finally set foot in South Sudan and during the whole period that he has been negotiating and mediating for peace in South Sudan. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Now, tell us, towards the end, when the deadline was just 2 weeks away, it looked like this deal was going to fall through. Take us through the intrigues and exactly what happened. What did you tell them? Was it a carrot and stick issue? What finally made them sit down and talk to each other?
I knew it was not an easy matter. And this indeed was not easy. I remember that Deputy President David Mabuza had taken the responsibility because of seniority. Yes. I'm a former vice president. He's a sitting deputy president, so we must always defer to him as our bigger brother. But we worked so well together. And at some stage it became clear that the matter of the number of states was so important that if it was not resolved, then we were not going to have the movement to the next phase, which is now the transition period. We are going to remain in the pre-transition period unless that matter was resolved. The other outstanding issue, Sarah, was the matter of security arrangements. But all of us became aware that with the 35,000 men and women who are shown up to the cantonment sites and the process ongoing, it wasn't easy, because you want to first of all screen the soldiers, and then those who are not fit will then go to the DDR part of it, demobilization and rehabilitation, and so that was going to take time. What was important, and this one required a political resolution, was the number of states. Because when President Salva took over from President Bashir, he took over South Sudan, an independent South Sudan, with 10 states. And under the Addis Ababa agreements on the Revitalized Peace Initiative, they wrote into that document that Dr. Riek Machar will be the first vice president, which meant if he was unhappy, then there was no movement forward. And he stuck to initially 10 states. He moved to 23 plus 1. David Mabuza and Jamal representing Sudan, and also Ismail Wais, the IGAD envoy, and our sister from Uganda, Bigombe, Betty. We all worked as a team, and we listened to all the parties, signatories to the Revitalized Peace Accord, including SOA, which meant the Association for South Sudanese Opposition Alliance, opposition teams. Everybody was a signatory. It was important. Now, at some stage, we had decided as envoys, let's have a bridging formula on these 32 states and 23 states and 10 states. And the formula, which I myself was uncomfortable with, was saying the comfortable number of states would be 23 plus 1, and the 1 of course means Abyei, which is disputed border territory, oil-rich between the north and the south. And I insisted, because I had all my briefings, and because of my interaction, the long history with these friends in the South Sudan, I knew that they are very tough negotiators. And one of the things which, by the way, was there in the agreement was, if we are negotiating on the number of states and they do not agree, then they will revert to number 10. And that is why eventually I was so happy to hear President Salva Kiir take the bull by the horns. And this has lifted his stature, not only in his country, but in the region, and the African region. So I must congratulate him again, and because that is what now made it possible for Dr. Riak also to say, yeah, now initially they said, no, why has he added +3?
Yes.
3 administrative areas. And I told Dr. Riak Machar, whatever else, you guys, you are now moving in as the first vice president, you resolve it with President Salva. When you're inside there. So we as a region cannot forever continue to push you.
Would you say that now, finally, we can have peace in South Sudan? Do you think now the guns will be silent?
I tell you, this thing about silencing guns is such a timely call within Africa. We have been the laughing stock of the world, the scar, as they say, on the world conscience. The time to silence guns is now. And our brothers and sisters in South Sudan have started 2020 very well by silencing the guns. So I want to call on all the other players, including Thomas Cirillo and others, men and women who are bearing arms. At some stage, the smaller groups are telling us, you people only listen to people who wield guns. Because you are not warlords, you are not listening to us. And we could see that. Now the time for them to use their mental guns and not physical guns is now in order to heal the nation and develop the newest African, the newest country in the world, the Republic of South Sudan. So I think they have demonstrated that indeed Africa can silence guns. So wherever else there's conflict in Africa, whether it be those areas of Nigeria with Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab in Somalia or wherever people have conflict, the best way is really to negotiate and act in the best interest of the people, always being guided by the principle of saving lives. Yeah, because in this particular case, imagine in 2016, because of the concept of one nation, two armies, yeah, over 400,000 people lost their lives. We cannot afford. The moment an African life is lost unnecessarily because of leadership problems, then Africa becomes the poorer.
So we have now 3 years before an election. Take us through what must be done between now and the 3 years.
They will do several things. One, farm up all these things by amendment or reform of their constitution, and also look at the matter of where the country has been hurting, okay? So they need to discuss transitional justice and all of that. It is all written in the document which they signed in Addis Ababa in 2018. At the end of which they would now have democratic elections. We must really get into that habit as Africa of having credible democratic elections and not elections that are stolen. Because when you steal elections again, you also create another conflict. Yeah.
So what will be the role? We have seen IGAD and the international community work with them up to this level.
Yes.
Sometimes using, the carrot and stick, sometimes first taking a back seat and watching them. So what will be the role of IGAD and the international community going forward in the next 3 years now?
I think the role is very well defined because we do have the particular areas which are again very well defined. For instance, we have a Kenyan called Kibara, who is the chair of the constitutional team. Now that is a team that is going to work during the transitional period to be able to make sure that if they are going to amend the constitution, align the laws in line with what they need to do, because they agreed on a very large National Assembly. All those things need to be looked into within the framework of the 10 states. If they want also to carry on and do referendum over the number of states, again, it is their sovereign right to carry out referenda going forward. So we will work as a region with them. My role as special envoy did not end with the swearing in of vice presidents. In fact, if anything, it has begun, so that we can also see how they can build the economy. We'll encourage, as I said, you heard some of us say, we need to meet Southern Sudanese halfway They are busy forming their government. We also want the international community to support them. The moment they impose sanctions on leaders, that is a negative energy. That's negative energy. So we hope again these sanctions regimes will be dealt away with as soon as they demonstrate goodwill, proper governance, the rule of law, adherence to the rule of law. Then sanctions should also disappear. Of course, there also be need to show solidarity. I said this in my remarks. Within the framework of again the revitalized agreement, I think the world needs to show solidarity with what is happening now in South Sudan. So a pledging conference, if you like, a donor partnership kind of conference where we support countries of the world, our friends in Europe, in Americas, wherever, coming in to say we need to support this country. Pledge initially to support them, but it's an oil-rich country again. So we hope there will also be proper governance as they exploit this natural resource. Because it's a country which can, within the next 5 years, show tremendous development. When we first started, Juba in 2011 was a small village. Now it's growing. You're getting a few 5-star hotels coming up. The Eritreans are investing and other people in the region are also investing, Ugandans, Kenyans. Kenyans in the service sector, particularly in the area of banking, where they have a comparative advantage. So there's a lot to be done between now and the elections in 2022.
You touched a bit on transitional justice, and I know this is still a very sensitive topic, even among the South Sudanese themselves. But do you think that the agreement should be followed to the letter? Should we see the formation of a hybrid court?
Well, that must be a very contentious subject if our own experience here as a country is anything to go by. And yet it has to be dealt with. I know that on the 15th of next month, they have called for a national dialogue conference. In fact, they have invited me as one of the speakers. And we want to be able to encourage them. The example South Africa, when they had to look at the history, what is it that hurt them over the years, the apartheid years, and they had to deal with that. Open discussion where citizens can weep for injustice admitted against their fellow human beings. It's important that we delve into those issues. It is never helpful to brush them aside. So if they wrote that in the agreement, which is true, hybrid courts to see who was responsible for what killing, I think is important. But I think of greater importance is a commitment to have national dialogue. And
finally, biggest lesson for Africa from this, and especially because this initiative was led by Africans.
We have also shown, Sarah, that Africans can sort their own problems. I can tell you that our friends in the West were very skeptical about this revitalized peace agreement which was signed in Addis Ababa. Originally, the earlier version, a lot of them were signatories. This time they refused to sign onto the document. And they were also positively surprised. So let us all work and support the people of South Sudan as they rebuild their country.
On a better note. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. God bless you.